All right, friends. So we have Jerod Johnson from CData. He works as a technology evangelist there. And Jerod is today going to give you a very crisp demo and a talk about SQL access to SaaS and cloud data through PolyBase. And we will have more links about CData and Jerod himself, contact details shared in the chat window so that you can connect with Jerod and CData, the company. And also, I want to take this moment to thank CData. They have been one of the knowledge partners for this event. And as you all know, Knowledge Partners has helped us make this event free for you. So that is what I've been calling out. So take a moment to connect with CData, connect with Jerod. Jerod, over to you, and you can share your screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just clicked to share. We'll see if that worked. Maybe. Oh.
I think now you should be able to share because I stopped. Yeah.
Yeah. There it is. It wouldn't be a tech conference without technical hiccups, right? So everybody should be able to see my screen now.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So let's get started. As I was introduced, I'm Jerod Johnson, Technology Evangelist for CData Software, and I am going to talk to you briefly today about getting SQL access to your SaaS and cloud data from your SQL Server instance. So we'll talk a little bit about who I am. My name is Jerod Johnson. I work for CData Software, which is in the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina in the United States. You can shoot me an email at jerodj@cdata.com. Find me on Twitter at Jerodimusprime. And just a brief background, I spent 6 years as a high school math and computer science teacher before finding a job as a software developer for CData. And then as a part of just my own personal growth and finding a fit in the company, I landed in this technology evangelist position, which means that I get to share our technology and engage the community with the ways that we allow you to work with your data using SQL. So what are we going to talk about today? I'll spend just a little bit of time talking about who CData is and kind of what our business is. And then the bulk of the conversation is going to be about PolyBase, so accessing distributed data in SQL Server. And then I'll talk a little bit about ODBC drivers, specifically the CData ODBC drivers, but the principles apply to all ODBC drivers. And then I'll demo accessing live Salesforce data in SQL Server 2019 via PolyBase. So CData Software is a leading provider of data connectivity solutions. And essentially, we make APIs look like databases. So the way that we do this is our drivers have an engine built in that will translate SQL 92 queries into API requests that then go live to a data source. So whether that's Salesforce or Google BigQuery or something like Facebook or Twitter, LinkedIn, and we'll process the response and return it to the tool or application as a database table. So as far as the tool or application is concerned, it's a SQL table or a SQL view. So rows and columns and different features that you would normally be used to seeing if you were talking to a database, but instead you're actually talking to live SaaS data or cloud data. So SQL Server PolyBase. What is PolyBase? PolyBase enables your SQL Server to process transact SQL queries that read data from external sources. So this could be another external database. It could be another data source that's accessible via ODBC. And it really is just the latest version of data virtualization for SQL Server. And this data virtualization allows integrating data from multiple sources without having to move the data. So you end up with this data layer, a virtual data layer that is typically called a data lake or a data hub, but the vernacular is always changing. So that, tomorrow that name could be something different. Through PolyBase, we can access all of our data from a single source. So it allows for controlling security. It allows for just generally controlling access, having a single source of truth for all of your data. PolyBase began in SQL Server 2016 with access to Hadoop data and Azure Blob Storage. And then starting with 2019, you get access to other SQL Server instances. You get access to Oracle data, Teradata, MongoDB data, and then any other ODBC data sources that are available. So the next question is, why would you want to use PolyBase? So before PolyBase existed, joining external data with your SQL Server data meant that you were either transferring half of your data, so that external data, so that all of your data was in one format or the other. And it meant querying both sources of data and then writing some custom query logic to join and integrate that data at the client level. What PolyBase does is it enables T-SQL queries, so Transact SQL queries, to join external data with SQL Server data without any additional software beyond, a data connector like an ODBC driver or a built-in connector. So one of the other benefits of PolyBase is that you get push-down computation to the server. So PolyBase supports pushing your computations to the data source. So whether that's the Oracle database or a SQL Server instance or the data sitting behind another ODBC driver, you're going to improve your query performance because you're leveraging server-side processing to free up client-side resources and computing power on the client machine. So whatever machine is running your SQL Server instance or whatever tool is accessing that SQL Server instance and using PolyBase to get to that external data. You can scale your compute resources with PolyBase. So to further improve performance, you can use scale-out groups, which enable parallel data transfer between SQL Server instances and the external data sources that you've connected to. And then you also get database scoped objects. So the external objects that you create are scoped to the database. So if you have to migrate your database, all of your PolyBase external tables are going to come right along with it. There are some considerations when it comes to PolyBase. PolyBase is read-only access, so you're not going to be able to write back to it via PolyBase. There are other options for that, and I'll talk in brief about link servers at the end. And then one of the other considerations is there's a maximum possible row size, which includes the full length of any variable length columns. So if you're on a SQL Server instance, your rows can't be larger than 32 kilobytes. And if you're on an Azure SQL Data Warehouse, your rows can't be any larger than 1 megabyte. So just things to think about. So CData ODBC drivers, I mentioned this briefly before. CData makes SQL wrappers for APIs. With the ODBC drivers, as far as your tools are concerned, you're talking to a database. So any tool or platform or application that supports ODBC connectivity is going to grant you SQL access to the data behind the ODBC drivers. The ODBC drivers also support query pushdown, which is great because that's what PolyBase supports. So the idea there is that your complex queries, whether that's a join or an aggregation or some other computation, is pushed down to the server. So if I ask Salesforce for something complicated, Salesforce is going to do all of the computation. Salesforce is going to do all of the calculations and then return the data to me, which means that my client machine doesn't have to be some monstrous data processing machine. It can be just your basic workstation that's building dashboards in Power BI, or a basic workstation that's running SQL Server Management Studio to query some data. Excuse me. The CData ODBC drivers are compatible with PolyBase for SQL Server 2019. And then they're also compatible with linked server technologies via the CData SQL Gateway. So without further ado, we'll jump into the demo. So do that. So before I start there, let's take a look at what configuring a data source using a CData ODBC driver looks like. So this is the DSN configuration for our Salesforce driver. Authenticating is going to be based on API authentication. So if you can use username password, that's available. If you can use OAuth, that's available. If there are other authentication schemes, those are going to be available. But you essentially just configure the connection using connection properties. There are options for caching, getting through firewalls. There are miscellaneous properties that allow you to really fine-tune the performance of the driver depending on your needs. But that gets that set up. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to create an external table based on Salesforce accounts. So as you can see here, we have some Salesforce account data. And so I will walk through the process of doing that. So live demos are horrifying, terrifying to perform. So what I've actually done is run all of these commands beforehand, except for the create table, just to reduce any hiccups. But this process is going to be the same for creating any external data source and external tables in PolyBase, even if you're not using a CData ODBC driver. So the first step is going to be to create the master encryption key. So this would run, there's already a master key. That's great. So the next step is going to be to create scoped credentials. So these credentials allow you to access that external data source. Depending on the data source that you're working with, you may need to use actual credentials here. If the data source that you're working with behind the ODBC driver requires a username and a password, you would enter those here. I'll run this query. It's going to error out because that work has already been done. And then the next step is going to be to create the external data source. So this is essentially the overarching layer that will allow you to create external tables based on data. So we're going to go via ODBC. The ODBC driver is stored locally, so we will use localhost. And then the only other connection options that are relevant is we need to select a DSN. So I'm using a system DSN here. And you would be able to configure multiple DSNs. So if I had multiple Salesforce accounts, I could create multiple external data sources based on those accounts by creating multiple DSNs inside the ODBC wizard. So I would be able to come in here and let's say if I wanted to create a new Salesforce source, I would come in here, select my ODBC driver. I would be able to create something new in this instance that I could then create another external data source for. So I'll run this, it should error out. And then, so the last step is going to be creating these external tables. And this is what's getting you access to that external data. So each of these tables that you create, in the case of Salesforce, is pointing to a specific API endpoint. So in this case, we're talking to the account endpoint and all of the functionality that's available there. But as far as a user is concerned and administrator is concerned, this is just an external table. You do need to define the schema, and there are options within the CData drivers for discovering information about that schema to make this process smoother. So we'll go there. So the command's completed successfully. So I'm in my example database. Going to go to my going to go to my tables. I'll need to refresh because you can see there's nothing there now. So when I refresh, so there's now an account table. So what we can do is just select the top 1,000 rows. I think there's only 500 or so rows in here anyway. So currently I am talking to Salesforce. I have requested data from Salesforce, and we're just waiting for that response to come back. So as you can see, we've got all of these tables, all of these rows. Each of these rows represents one of the accounts in my Salesforce account. And then let's see how we're doing on time. So what I might do is, so I'm going to edit an account just to demonstrate the fact that it's live, assuming that things cooperate. So let's say somehow I keyed this in wrong and this is actually an LLC and not an Inc. So we'll save it, come back here. And then we'll just edit this query. So where name like pyramid. Let's see. Let's see if we can find him in here actually. No, probably not. So Ideally, this will work. So what's happening is I've actually sent the filter. This filter gets sent to Salesforce. So there it is, the LLC. Let's say, oh no, I was actually wrong. It was incorporated. So we'll run that query again. Again, the filtering is being sent to Salesforce. I'm not running that querying. So as you can see, boom. So live Salesforce data directly from our SQL Server instance. And that's pretty much it for the demo. So I do want to speak very briefly about the other connectivity options available from CData. So we have the ODBC drivers that give you options for connectivity from BI reporting and ETL tools, access to data through PolyBase. We do have SSIS components. So you get the same kind of connectivity, but from your SSIS workflows. And we also have a product called API Server that allows you to build APIs on top of your database data. So you get RESTful, typically OData APIs. Free trials are available, cdata.com/downloads. If you have any questions, if you need help, or if you have some feedback, shoot me an email, jerod@cdata.com. So, and thanks to the Knowledge Partners for making this event free for everyone.
Thank you very much, Jerod. And thanks to CData for helping us make this event free for everyone. And Jerod, you will be very happy to know that we had like more than 4,000 people who registered. And in the morning, we had like 1,200 people live for this event.
Well, that's awesome.
Yes. As the day progresses a bit, you see a downturn. That's kind of obvious with online events.
Right.
So, right, friends, thank you very much. Jerod, thanks. Of course, people will connect with you if they need more information. So friends, yes, CData information is there in the chat window. In fact, there is one link that I can point out to. That's the link at the end. If you want knowledge partners like CData and others to connect with you, you can choose which knowledge partner you want to be connected to, and just fill out your name and email ID, and they will connect back to you. So please do that. And thank you, Jerod, and have a good day. I know it's just the beginning of the day for you, and it's quite early for you. So thank you so much for coming and for the quick demo.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.